All right, so picking a deck, I'm going to zoom through, like I said, this is an outline, and try and keep things to our time. Classic decks, what I'm calling a classic, are based on the Rider-Waite imagery, which is kind of the original baseline deck that lots of people know. Rider and Waite are the names of the people who created it. There's a kind of, whatever those images are, in other words, if the Three of Swords, is pictured, it's a heart with three swords in it, then other artists will usually create a Three of Swords similarly in their own style. So it's still a heart with three swords. So you can read very easily from deck to deck, because artists then just kind of reimagine it. If it's an Art Deco deck, if it's a fantasy deck, if it's a Wonderland deck, it still might have the Queen of Hearts and then, three swords somehow there. It's going to follow those images. So a lot of people either start with the Rider-Waite or something similar that I'm calling the classic deck style. Then there's kind of deviance from that, where someone may decide to draw it completely different. The Three of Hearts, the Three of Swords could be three people, could be three swords on the card, could be anything at all they imagine, because you can go anywhere with tarot. So when you pick a deck, one of the things to think about is whether you want it to follow the sort of classic imagery. If it's not Rider-Waite, I don't happen to love that art style, so I never started with Rider-Waite. But I won't pick a number, but there's over 30 decks and more that probably all follow the Rider-Waite imagery or the base imagery. There's so many decks now. There used to be less. There's hundreds. And it's hard to look at the name of the deck and be like, what's this thing look like? So, but when I'm just terminology. So a classic deck I'm calling one that follows the Rider-Waite imagery. Other decks are fantasy, created worlds, themes like Wonderland or Inner Child or fairy tales. And how that artist and or author deviate is up to them to create. And when you're picking a deck, you're wanting to kind of assess whether it's that system or not, if that matters to you. Some decks also come with their own books, which can be helpful because it is more of an explanation. They all come with a little pamphlet, but some decks have their own system and more to it, so you can look for one that comes with a book if you want more explanation. Choose a deck whose style, the art appeals to you, not just the concept. My example here is you might be really into Egypt and Egyptology, but when you find the particular artist's Egypt deck that got created out there, it might not work. It may be too primal, primitive art, or it just might not be a style, or that person may not have created a very good deck, So I've got lots of decks, and one of the reasons is I bought ones that didn't work for me. They were neat conceptually, but that's it. That's as far as they went. And when I went to read with them or just never tried, they didn't go into the depth of connection that I really wanted for the images. To me, I'm very visual, so I'm going to speak to that much more than the book knowledge of what the deck cards mean. So to me, it's important to pick something visual that speaks to you, an art style you like, cards that have a personality or feel like a friend, not just a concept. But like I said, my acupuncturist friend really loved the Chinese deck because she got it. Mm-hmm. So sometimes there's a great mash, a connection of I'm really into this and this deck really fits what I'm really into. Yeah. Some people there's a lot of goth and vampire and dragon, very trendy, specific sort of fan art things that decks get created around. You can even find probably 10 dragon decks or angel decks. So people create stuff they think is popular too, and it doesn't always mean it's good. Mm-hmm. So take a look through multiple things that you might find. The internet's great too. You can research almost any deck online and do an image search and find a wide range of what the images are, because a lot of stores you can't open them up and shuffle through. They might have 3 cards as a sample, or on the packaging they usually show you some really pretty looking cards, and then you're like, oh, you open the deck and it's not that great. So do as much as you can to see what the images really are and if they speak to you. A lot of the other thing I want to talk about is sort of what I call the shortcut deck, where they did a really great job on the major arcana. That was their concept when they created the deck, and then they kind of called it in for the rest. In other words, the One of Swords is one sword in the middle of the card. The Two of Swords is 2 swords. 3 of Swords is 3 swords. it looks like playing cards the way it is. 1 club, 2 club, 3 club. I personally can't read with those. And there's a lot of them out there. So unless the deck's packaging or the internet or whatever shows you what some of the minor arcana, you don't know if it's that, what I'm calling a shortcut deck. I'm kind of downing the artists who create them, but I think they fall short. They have an idea, but they don't follow it through with the art. And it's a lot of cards to create. So the major arcana, there's 22, and then there's 14 times 4 suits. So the total is, I think, 78 cards, if I'm doing my math right. 4 times 14 is, yeah, so 78 cards. So it's a lot to create. If you're an artist, if you have a concept, it's a great idea, and then you go, oh my God, 78 images.
My friend Lisa did that. She did beautiful artwork, but then when it came for, you know, yeah.
I think that's why, and then that's why a lot of Oracle and other kind of style decks are out there, because they can create 40 or 50 or 20, whatever they want, till they feel like they're done.
Right.
And they can publish something, goddess cards and so forth, which is great too. If you find one of those that speak to you, that's fine also. This class, I'm going to stick with a foundation, at least, of the tarot structure. Some people believe they must be gifted a deck, that they can't buy it for themselves. It's up to you if you believe that. Or they think the right deck will come to them when the time is right. I said that's okay too, but it can take longer than you want. Some people have a deck but no longer use it because of associations. I used it when I worked such and such. I had a boyfriend and this was all about us. Someone gave it to me that I don't like anymore. You can always cleanse a deck and gift it to someone else. Clear the room for yourself to get another deck. If the deck's just lingering and doesn't have a meaning for you anymore, you know, it's a magical tool. And if you want to keep it, you can keep it. If you want to use it or clear the way, you know, for something else. And I'm going to talk a little bit about cleansing decks in a minute. Deck manners, rituals, and spells. Manners, what we did before we handled the decks today, we sprayed our hands with a little bit of smudge. You can wash your hands, of course, with like some salt water. You can just take a minute to wash your hands, ground yourself, hold a crystal. Things like that are helpful to ground your own energy and just set an intention that you are handling someone else's ritual object. If it's your deck, you don't have to let anyone touch it if you don't want, if you're just doing readings for yourself. Various ways of purifying by the elements. Earth, you can use dirt or salt. Air, you can use smudge, feathers, or even the spoken word. Fire, sunlight is great, putting the cards out in the sun for a day. Using incense is another way to use fire. Water, you can use a spray like this or a very damp cloth with just water, or something in the water like this where it's an essential oil but it's not oily, to clear your cards or clear yourself. How to banish a deck and discontinue use. If you have a deck you really don't want to use ever. Laura, who was here last week, mentioned burning a deck. You can, if you really don't want it to exist anymore, you can burn it. It's paper. If you want to cleanse it, to reuse it, some people have been, you can even bury it and take it up from the earth. If you needed something that drastic, you can bury it and leave it there. If you want to banish a deck and never use it again, and not, you know, if you think there's something trapped in it, or some spirit or connection that's bad that you don't want to give or pass on, I think the best thing is probably either burning or burying the deck. People tend to keep their cards wrapped in a cloth, something natural fabric, usually silk, cotton, and then inside some kind of bag for carrying. The cloth helps. Again, just make it, I think these things are talismans that help us ritualize and treat it as sacred, treat it as special. It's not just a toy or an object to be thrown around. And then people lay out a cloth usually that's special also for readings. It can be what they wrap the cards in or something else. I have a bamboo mat I like a lot. I like having something on my table. The same thing, it defines kind of the ritual space and the boundary of what I'm doing. So no matter where I am, I really have a mat that I do readings on, even if it's a table or whatever, because it's just kind of, again, it defines a little perimeter within which the work is happening. It's a little mini ritual, even if it doesn't look ritualized to other people. You can create more of a ritual around your readings if you want. You can have a grounding meditation you do for yourself every time. You can have a candle you light every time. You can use things like oils or smells to lock you in to a particular state of mind. So if you light a candle with a certain smell every time you read, you'll start attuning yourself to that scent in the air, to feeling like, okay, I'm locked in and here and present, and now I'm paying attention in a way that is kind of hypersensitive. It's nice to do that, to use something the same way every time. Getting to know your deck when you're first working with a new deck, whether you've read before or not, you can carry it around with you everywhere, whether you take it out or not. It's just with you. I find that then I'm sitting in a restaurant and I have time and I'll pull out the cards and look at them. Or I'm at a doctor's office. I find that if I have them with me, it gives me that opportunity. Some people even say sleep with them under your pillow. It's another way simply to decide how you want to connect with the energy of the cards. Simple thing to do to start is to pull a card every day. You can start or end your day with a 1 card. And you can say it's a predictive card for your following day. You can say it's simply you're open to the messages it has for you. You don't have to attach a lot to the reading as much as just open yourself up to looking at the cards, just like journaling or committing to some kind of artistic process. It's a way to practice, and it's kind of a drill that becomes more than. So, yeah, pulling a card and reflecting on the previous day that happened to see how the card, whether it matches up, and how you can learn from what you connect between the two things. So that touches on the last thing on the first page, which is how to use the cards in spells, visualizations, rituals. Aside from doing readings, you can,
If people want to look.
thank you. Aside from doing readings, you can create your own spells or visualizations if you have something you want to create. You want to bring in prosperity. Lay out some of the cups, which relate to prosperity, or the 10 or the ace of cups. If you want to call a lover into your life, maybe you put the card that you feel represents you next to the lover's card on your bedside or on a table or your altar. So you can create your own kinds of spells and visualizations and rituals around the cards. Symbolism and myth. Why the cards work after all this time, or the importance of symbolism and archetypes. I'm a deep student of archetypes, mythology, and things I see in common from system to system that seem universal. So while the tarot seems esoteric and its own sort of entity, where did this come from and why did it last for all these years? There's deep connections we have to the symbols in the tarot, even if you've never heard of some of the words like Hierophant or the High Priest. There's a spiritual leader who's been part of our community living since cave days. There were shamans, there were people you sought spiritual advice from. The sun and the moon, they've been in our skies forever. So they are powerful forces that we have looked to and associated meanings to over time, and while those meanings have changed over time, everybody has a response. So that's why the classic images in the tarot often resonate so well, and why people are drawn to creating more and more decks. Why do we keep creating art? It's because we want to take this thing in ourselves and then express it out again in another way. Some people who are very into astrology are going to see all kinds of astrology symbols in the deck. The people who create the deck, if the things they know, they put into. So it's this process of taking in and putting out, I think, over the years, this system that in some ways remains the same and in many ways evolves and changes. There's very modern looking decks, there's steampunk decks, there's kind of anything. But the idea follows the major arcana, which are archetypes, and the suits. And the suits are 4, and they follow basically the 4 elements. That symbolic structure seems to speak to people and work as a system of divination for all these years. Carl Jung is a well-known psychologist who wrote a lot about archetypes and mythology and sort of this idea of collective unconsciousness or universal consciousness, that after, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, or where our spirits come from, or what we are more than just our physical selves. And there are theories about some way that we are all connected, whether it's because we all breathe the same air, we're all made from the same molecules of water, everything you drink and sweat becomes another being on the earth or a tree or recycles into the animals we end up eating, we're all connected. And so Jung had this theory, and I'm probably going to misrepresent it, but I'll do my best, which was about how there may be some kind of collective unconscious that we can all tap into. And so in a way, what are we all doing but plugging in maybe in our super awareness, higher senses selves to something bigger than us. And that's whether there's some universal meaning that the moon has to everybody, or the sun, because if the sun didn't come up, life didn't happen.
Right.
Growth, farming, animals, existence. The sun went down, it was dangerous, hunters came out, animals, predators, things like that are still in our DNA. They're still in our core as human beings on this planet. And so there are things where the sun still represents a new day, the innocence of life, the new beginnings, things like that. So I think the tarot taps into that. The hero's journey, I can't go into a lot. I put it here in my notes so that I can touch on it and come back to it. The hero's journey is something specific that Joseph Campbell wrote about, so it's his term, I believe. But the hero's journey you can see in lots and lots of stories and movies and media over time. You can look at things that were written a long time ago. You can look at things that are written now. There are myths that are 2,000 years old that are also as modern as today, about your protagonist having some kind of journey, starting out with a naive level of experience or skills, going through some kind of challenge, obstacles, journey to some kind of underworld where they have to confront their darker, deeper selves, get over or learn or adapt, get help, learn, open up to sometimes help from the spirits, things like that. And then they rise up again, reborn into their older, more mature, newer, wiser selves. That's essentially the gist or very, very quick overview of the hero's journey. It's some kind of process where we go down and back up. And we all do this in our lives. We have evolution, revolution. We have the phoenix story that is reborn from its ashes. There's the Sumerian myth of Inanna, where she literally goes to the underworld, is killed, hung on a hook to die for 3 days, and is reborn again. And this predates the Christ story, which also follows that. So, not to debate religion or the validity of it, I'm sort of a myth fan. So I know the Bible just as much as I know other things that are all stories we tell. And that's as far as I go, because I don't preach what you have to believe. But I see similarities. And things like Star Wars go there too. Harry Potter, you have to confront the shadow part, the darker parts of yourself, undergo some kind of challenge, ordeal, facing your inner darkness, purging of it, and generally triumphing, because we like inspirational stories. We don't usually write a lot about the hero getting stuck in the underworld and failing. So he usually rises up and comes out on top at the end, only to go through that process over and over. Okay. Questions on that before I move on, because that's kind of heavy stuff I'm going super quick with. But is there some familiarity, at least with that, with some of you? Okay. Mm-hmm. So the tarot follows that in the major arcana. We start with the Fool, and we end up with the World. We go through a process of inner turbulence and struggle and challenge through the major arcana and come out at the end. And the process through through the suit cards, the Ace through the 10, is that similar journey also, with reflections on the ups and downs. So kind of the middle of that is usually where there's turbulence. So The mid-major arcana are more troubling. Things like death and the tower and the hanged man come up in the middle there. The ace through 10, usually the 3s, 4s, and 5s get a little bit murky where weird things start to happen, and then you get overcome them, and then you might have a little dip at the very end, the 9 just before the 10, where you triumph again. So the cards follow this up and down in their structure, in how they're developed. So that's why I wanted to tie that in and connect it. The major arcana, the deck structure, they go from 0 to 21. So 0 is the Fool. We'll go through the majors next time, one by one. The minor arcana are 4 suits. They are numbered from ace through 10, and then usually 4 court cards. There's typically a king, queen, page, knight, or king, queen, prince, princess. So this brings to a note on choosing decks. If you're a woman, you want yourself represented. And in general, a lot of the imagery in the decks originally were very male dominant. So if you want to see faces and characters in a deck that represent you, that's the kind of deck you want to choose. So some decks have tried to even out that gender in the court cards. They make the effort to label them different things like prince and princess so that there's 2 of each gender. There are gay and lesbian tarot decks. I don't know if there's any trans decks or genderless. So there's more unisex in the drawings.
There's a couple.
It's good to start realizing that we need that, because the decks have been based on a binary gender system, of course, for years, and the idea of polarity to masculine and feminine energies, which I'm okay with, because I think that's a useful tool for reflection. Masculine and feminine energies, and I'll try and say it that way rather than men and women, because we all have both, and the things around us have both. I just want there kind of an equal representation in my deck so that it isn't so gender biased towards all the characters being men or male dominant. I have here on the paper to help you remember, pentacles are earth. They're the discs, usually pictured as coins or gold. Air, swords are air. Wands are fire, cups are water. Ways to remember that. Actually, I have in a moment. The court cards I spoke to. Oh, and this last comment here. Start doing readings with just the major arcana and aces if you want. That's my hint for how to pare the deck down, to start doing readings where it's like, okay, not the whole 78 cards. Some people do just the major arcana. That's a pretty common suggestion. I would add the 4 aces as well, so that you're learning what the 4 suits mean at the same time. So the ace of each suit just kind of is like the major arcana of that suit, sort of like the trump or the highest symbolic representation of what that suit represents. Water, cups, emotions. So the suit that's cups or chalices or vessels or tears or whatever your deck has decided to call it usually goes with water or emotions, our heart connections, and our feelings. So that deals with things like relationships, family, love, breakups, choices about people in our lives, things that are about our feelings. Earth or pentacles are about the physical in the world. So while they're discs of gold or coins, which represent money and money things like your house, your home, your stability, your car, your job, your career, your health actually too, because those are what I call the foundations. What you build your life on tend to be what pentacles represents. Also sometimes travel, your house, home, or what you're creating. It can be not literally your house, but the idea of a home you're working towards in terms of the people and things necessary to create that feeling of home. Air, swords are your mental and sort of thinking areas. So decisions, communication, will, and rational thought. So swords come up usually about sometimes breakups, because that's a choice you're making. Forks in the road about what to do, where to go, which direction to take, whether communications got messed up with people. Often swords show up about obstacles in your way or communications that aren't coming through, things that are not being expressed that need to. A lot of the swords are sort of negative cards, there's a lot of turbulence and trouble in the swords cards. They tend to come up when they're indicating difficulties in this area. And fire wands is the creative force. If you think about a bud blossoming, this was always the hardest one for me to remember or make sense of, because when they picture a wand as just a staff or a rod, it doesn't look like anything. But if you think about a tree branch that blossoms, the most godlike thing is creation and procreation. So the blossoming fruit symbolizes the potential to create and manifest and make in life. So literally the fire energy of creation relates to the wands. So manifesting things in your life that you want, goals, pursuits, ambitions, dreams, actions, creative expression, art, and sexuality all are in the realm of wands. Feedback on that and thoughts that you've heard where things associate differently, because this is my best summary, but things get mixed up. Sometimes people associate different things with different suits.
So my question kind of goes back to a little bit
Yeah,
before about
go ahead.
paring down the decks and using the
Yeah.
ace of each one. So if you were doing it that way, would you use the ace just as its traditional meanings or as a symbolism of that area of what's going on in your life?
I would use the ace. So if I did a reading with just majors and aces, and I pulled 3 cards, and one was the ace of a suit, basically I would read it as about that area. In other words, let's say it was the ace of wands. It would tell me to maybe start a new project. It would say, add some creative energy in your life. Is it stuck? Is it moving well? Sometimes cards show up to tell you what's stuck, and sometimes they show you up to tell you how things are going. You usually know. So if it shows up, I might be like, oh, I haven't been spending any time on my music lately. Maybe I should. Or it could show up be saying, you're doing really well. You're on the right path. It could be confirming what I'm already doing as being good. That's kind of how I would read it. If the Ace of Swords came up, I would read it as, is there someone I'm not talking to that I should? It's a good week for communicating. Maybe ask for that raise. It's like a prosperous sign in favorable direction with that force. In other words, it's saying that is with you at the moment. Is my best way to put that. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. So that's kind of structure and the deck. Touching on developing intuition. The key thing in starting to do readings, once you kind of have an idea of where you're coming from like this, is how to open up to intuition, because that's the hardest thing. You go from, okay, I'm going to look everything up in a book and kind of patchwork this together, what each card means in my reading, and I'm going to get some kind of idea what cards are saying to me. So practicing intuition can happen anywhere, anytime. You can play a game where you're sitting at a restaurant looking at strangers and going, oh, that's what they're talking about. That's what that person's energy feels like. Oh yeah, if you play a game where you see a conversation but can't hear it, figure out what you think they're talking about. You can do all sorts of things in daily life that kind of open up your ability to sense the world around you and what it represents. Because that's what we're looking at. We're looking into symbols and meanings and seeing deeper into things. When I was talking about pulling a card a day, it's another way to get to know the card slowly and just let yourself, without looking it up in the book, decide what you think it means. Practice tuning into your senses, your emotions, your idea of true north to grow confident. True north is what I call it when you have your internal compass that says a thing, and you can kind of feel out whether that is right or not.
Your uh-huh or uh-uh.
Yeah, your uh-huh. And sometimes you get chills, or sometimes you just have a feeling, or you get nauseous. You may have a physical sensation of a thing when you land on truth. Taking small risks with your readings at first, see if you're right, learn how that feels. So like Lana was suggesting, if you pull a card and you reflect on the day you've already had, you grow confident. Oh, these really are speaking to me. They do connect. They do have something to say that relates, that is relevant. It's okay to still use the book, but also see what you think the meaning is before looking it up. And that will confirm what you feel. It's kind of risky, even when you're alone and no one's watching, to pull a card and be like, okay, I'm not going to cheat. I'm not going to look the book up. I'm going to decide what I think this means. Because you got to do that first. If you look the book up and you go, oh yeah, that's what I thought too, you're kind of not helping yourself. You have to take risks, even if it's just you going, okay, I'm going to risk it. And don't feel stupid. Don't ever feel stupid. Because you're not supposed to know this if you don't know it yet. You may feel like, oh, I'm so slow in learning this, or I should know this by now. Your pace is your pace. And wherever you're at with learning the tools that you've got, it is really yours to own and to not pressure yourself at all about. So you can continue using the book for as long as you want as far as what to look up for meanings. But I encourage you to really, this class is mostly geared on how to get off book, because you always will have the book. You don't need me for that. But everybody's book is a little different too. You'll find that. What if this person says the Three of Swords means such and such, and this person says it means something else? What do you go with? So at some point you have to kind of consensus it a little bit and come up with what you think it most means to you. Christy mentioned something earlier about cards falling out. So when you're handling your deck, shuffling, ordering it, doing a reading, not doing a reading, cards sometimes just fall out. That happens. Look at those to see if they have meaning for you. I'm open to it just being random, and I'm open to it being meaningful, and the truth is somewhere in there. So if I'm shuffling and Page of Cups falls out, put it back in. And then 2 days later, I see it again, either in a reading or when I'm looking at the cards or it grabs my attention. It's telling me something, so I might as well pay attention to what it's telling me. There are signs all around us in the world. You hear a song 3 times in the radio, and oh, yeah, what's that about? So the cards are no different than that. We have things in the world all around us that talk to us. So it's about practicing listening to this tool and what it has to say. And I use the Page of Cups in that specifically because it's a messenger. So I literally said a messenger is telling me a message in that example, to be silly. How to ask questions when you're doing readings. Steps in a reading. I spoke to that a little bit earlier. Prepare your space, ground yourself, think of your question, shuffle the deck, and lay out the cards. And I wrote it down here so you don't have to. When you end a reading, take pictures or notes. Decide to keep your cards separated or mix back in and cleanse your space. What I mean by that is I will sometimes, if I've done a reading, with the deck, the deck's all got the backs facing one way, I'll put the cards that are in the reading opposite so that I can still see them maybe the next time I get my cards out. Because the next time I get my cards out, I'll shuffle them for my reading. But I have my past reading sometimes there so I can look at it again. That's if I don't want to take notes. Or if I want to remind myself what the card said. If I want to create my own visualization, spell, manifestation, do the same thing. I'll take maybe 3 cards I want to use, face them the other way in the deck, and then put them back in my bag so that they're kind of separated and intentional that way. And then whenever I'm ready to do readings, I'll shuffle them back in. So that's what I mean. You can decide when to mix the cards back in whenever you're ready to let go of that reading. And if you're not done with it yet, you can allow it to linger or purposefully ask it to take place in your life or linger in your life. A journal is a great idea. If you do a card a day, that's at the very end a suggested homework actually for you guys, is to start a journal and do a card a day. And that way you write down what they are. In the age of cell phones, it's great to be able to take pictures of your readings. When I do readings for other people, I invite them to do that as well, so that they can take a shot and focus on images that call to them later. And you can also just pick one card. If you did a 3-card reading, that's not hard to keep in your mind. If you did a 10-card reading, I might take a picture of 1 or 2 that were most meaningful to you, or most puzzling. The one you couldn't connect with might be the one to remember later, because you got the message from the rest, and that's the one you didn't understand. Asking clear, discrete questions for yourself. Instead of talking about doing readings for other people, I'm going to talk mostly about doing readings for yourself. When you ask questions, the best thing to do is keep it focused and one at a time. If you ask a bunch of questions that are all on your mind and about your job and your relationship and this and your health and someone else, and then something else distracts your mind too, you've now just thrown sort of a lot of questions at the deck, and the deck is going to give you answers to all of it at once, and none of them are going to relate to each other. Because one card's going to answer one question, one card's going to answer another. At least this is kind of how I explain it.
And you don't know which answer was for which question.
And that's true too. You're like, okay, which card goes with what? This says yes, this says no, this says maybe, this is disastrous. No, you don't have any answers. Cards can be very ambiguous and vague sometimes. So I have found they also have a sense of humor. A very good and common answer is the power is within your hands.
Yeah.
A lot of times the deck will give you that answer in a lot of versions that say it's up to you.
Or you already know the answer.
Or you already know.
Priestess, the magician,
And so
right?
yeah, but that's okay because I think we look for confirmation as well as new information. Half the reading usually is telling you what you already know and then what to do about it or with it or get off your ass and do the thing you know already. It's kind of giving you a little nudge. So the best way to get an answer that is helpful is to ask a question that is helpful. So what should I do next? Or I have these two jobs in mind and these two cards are about job A, these two cards are about job B. You lay them down and then turn them over. You decide ahead of time what they're about, which cards are for which job, and then you have a more decided guiding. If you say, I'm trying to decide between two jobs and you pull 4 cards, you still don't know which cards are for which job. So you have to help yourself too in how you ask the questions and then what meanings you assign to the spread you do. Some spreads are designed with meanings assigned to the positions, and some spreads you can just kind of make yourself up. What I'm talking about is sort of when you're just learning the deck and pulling 1 or 2 cards, you're not really doing a spread, so it's up to you what the cards really relate to. So you're like, okay, is this about today or is it about tomorrow? You have to decide before you're picking your card. If you're trying to invoke something, you're going to choose that before you pull your cards. Am I being clear?
Yes.
Okay.
What about yes/no readings?
I've got that in here. I've got 3 card spreads and yes/no readings. Terrific question. I'm going to pause this.